Here's what I think of Sonic Generations now, after having actually played it. The visuals are spectacular. Sonic 4, which looked more like pieces of construction paper sliding over each other than a world filled with any depth, looks like crap compared to this. Green Hill has been brought to life beautifully. It just goes on, and there are so many different settings they managed to cram into this one act, and it gives a great feeling of exploring an inviting dreamland. The designers added so much detail, but have refrained from cheapening the experience with any misguided attempt to make it resemble the real world. It is the surreal, cartoony, escapist fantasy it always was, and that I think they should strive to make all Sonic games reflect. Classic Sonic looks great. His animations are smooth and expressive, and nothing he does feels out of place. There are more than a few things that bother me, though. While the level design is quite nice, with plenty of fast-paced platforming and many paths to take, there are things that cheapen it a bit. When Sonic hits a spring, he is caught in a stifling, scripted event. In the classic games, if you happen to be moving when you land on a spring, you would continue to move in that direction upon being launched back up and get more hang time. Springs were a convenient means of traveling. Now, most of these springs trap you in an invisible column and you're forced straight up, unable to budge or break free of this trap until you reach the peak of your ascent and start moving back down, decreasing playability. Also, I thought the designers may have stopped doing this, but all you have to do now is touch a spring and you'll be sucked into yet another scripted event. Does Mario go down a vertical pipe by touching it from the side? In the Genesis games, you had to land on a spring. Now you don't. Why does this bother me? Well, because it's one less thing for the player to do. No longer do you have to bother to go through the trouble of actually trying to land on these things. And while this is just a little thing, it's one of many little things that reduce a player's interactivity with a game, so it requires less and less player input. It's fine for there to be a few scripted events here and there, as there have always been, right from the beginning, but this is too much. Sonic controls pretty well, though his acceleration feels just a tad slow. The physics are much better than in Sonic 4, much of the time. Inclines do affect your movement, and most of the time, Sonic will respond naturally to how the landscape is shaped. At least when running. Rolling is hit and miss. If you run, then crouch after building up some momentum, Sonic will roll for a while, which is good. Rolling down a steep incline and attempting to pick up more speed is a struggle, though. Half the time, it still kinda works, but often he slows down unnaturally while moving downhill. And it's like he's trying so hard to uncurl that you practically have to wrestle the controls to keep Sonic pinned down, which just doesn't feel right. Jumping through a loop won't help much. If you try jumping after making it at least halfway through a loop, Sonic will continue on his way, and doing so even a little bit earlier will send him falling back. Even if you do manage to make it through a loop while jumping, you won't get any speed. At best, you'll retain the exact speed you had when you entered the loop. Much of the time, rolling really does work, but it's hard to predict when it's going to fail you. And then there's the rebound mechanics. They really screwed this up. In the classics, however hard you hit an enemy would affect how high or how far you would bounce. Those who have mastered this ability will have their skills put to waste in this game, as no matter how high you drop into an enemy or item from, you will never bounce back up more than a few feet. It doesn't matter how you try to fiddle around with the environment, it just ain't happening. You can kiss your dreams of soaring through the skies of Sonic's world with flair and majesty goodbye. And then there's the spin dash, or as I like to call it, the spam dash. There are two ways to use a spin dash, or spam dash, whatever, the way we did it back in the day, and now you can just tap a button briefly and just plow through everything, effortlessly. You don't even have to stop to use it. No matter how fast you're running, tapping that button anywhere in the game will almost instantly force Sonic to completely stop, with no resistance whatsoever, as all the momentum you just built up is somehow bizarrely cancelled out. It's so ridiculously easy to pull off, and so overpowered it almost feels like the boosting that is cheap in modern games like Rush and Unleashed. Did they think kids would get sick of having to sit through the classic sections if they weren't enough like the modern sections? I thought this game was supposed to be for everybody. Some of you may think I'm being anal about this and making too big of a fuss over these things, but try to understand that Sonic is ultimately defined by how he moves, not how fast he is, but how he attains that speed. The physics are the absolute most important part of any Sonic game. How they function drastically affects everything and can completely change the player's experience. Rolling, bouncing, these things are what made the classics so brilliant. And you'd think that if they could program those games the way they did back then, 20 years ago, that programming a game similarly in today's day and age, with today's technology, this wouldn't be so freakishly hard to do. I remember when Sonic 4 was still being made. SEGA took a few extra months to work on the physics and try to fix the game. They didn't. So either they didn't bother because they didn't really care, or the programmers of that game tried but failed because they're incompetent. I'd at least like to think the programmers of this game are far more competent, though, since it shows that they are, at the very least, trying. They just need to try harder. Sonic Generations certainly looks the part, and it isn't downright unplayable. It's still a masterpiece compared to Sonic 4. But as much as SEGA has already done with this, they need to buckle down and do this right. If they want this game to truly reflect the classics, it needs to play like them. It needs to move and feel like them. They have plenty of time to fix this game, and I hope they do put that time to use so it won't be a repeat of Sonic 4. If this really is the last time we're ever going to see classic Sonic appear in a game, then let's give him a death that will be remembered for his glory.